Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Tuesday, February 3rd, and what a day in the NBA that we just had. 4 trades in total, 3 of them involving all-star level talents that we're going to dive into in a little bit. And to give you guys a bit of context, most of the podcasts that you're about to hear I actually recorded last night on Monday, February 2nd. Had a great podcast lined up for you guys. Just finished it up a little too late, didn't quite have the time to edit and eventually post the podcast. So I'm like, no big deal. I mean, the NBA trade deadline, it's basically like a college assignment, right? None of the GMs actually do anything until the day of the deadline. I'll be fine. We'll have a quiet Tuesday. And that was not the case. So I was fully planning on editing and posting the pod from last night when I got home. But we had such large deals get done today. I had to quickly re-record this intro and talk about 3 of the biggest deals that we had in a little bit. So to give you the outline for the full podcast, we're going to talk about Jaren Jackson getting traded to the Utah Jazz, Vucevic, my Boston Celtics, making a big move to acquire a new starting center, moving out Anthony Simons. We're going to talk about the deal that literally just happened within the past 45 minutes. James Harden and Darius Garland getting swapped for one another. That one came out of nowhere. I guess not out of nowhere because that buzz started a little bit last night, but really fascinating deal that we're going to dive into. And then we get into what I recorded last night, which was some Giannis trade buzz, the latest there. Trades from earlier in the week, we had DeAndre Hunter getting traded to Sacramento. Vit Krejci, I know you guys are on the edge of your seat, want to get my Vit Krejci thoughts. He got traded to Atlanta. I do cover that a little bit. I did also want to talk about the Western Conference Finals rematch that we got on Sunday night between the Thunder and the Nuggets. I talk about that later in the podcast, as well as the Red Hot Hornets. And I will close out this podcast by giving my reactions to the full all-star rosters that were announced the other day. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please, just praying that there is not another trade that breaks, because I am trying to record this extra segment here at the halftime of Mavs Celtics. So let's get into these big trades so I can go watch my Celtics. So the first significant trade that we had today was between the Memphis Grizzlies and the Utah Jazz. And in this deal, we actually had 8 different players moved, which was pretty surprising. I think we're going to see a lot more of these large-scale deals become more common, just as a byproduct of the new salary cap and the multiple apron structure. Just really hard to align contracts these days, even though I don't think the Jazz or the Grizzlies were particularly close to the aprons in this particular deal. But nonetheless, in this move, the Utah Jazz received Jaren Jackson Jr., John Conchar, Jock Landale, and Vince Williams Jr., and in return, the Memphis Grizzlies received Walter Clayton Jr., Taylor Hendricks, George Niang, Kyle Anderson, and 3 first-round picks. So the headline is obviously Jaren Jackson. I don't really think any of these other players are super notable. I don't really mean to downplay the rest of the careers of these guys here. I think Vince Williams is a nice little fun player that the Jazz were able to pick up as well. Even had a nice little stretch at point guard earlier in the season for a really banged-up Memphis team. And meanwhile, on the other end, I mean, I'd say Walter Clayton is probably the most valuable player that Memphis got in return. He was obviously a really fantastic college player coming out of Florida, winning the national championship last year. Taylor Hendricks, also a former first-round pick that has had some injury issues, so not sure what his career is going to lead to once he is back and healthy. And then you have the 3 first-round picks going to Memphis as well. So I think we need to start there, because the biggest return that Memphis got is the salary cap flexibility of moving on from Jaren Jackson and also getting back those 3 first-round picks. So let's talk about what those look like. A pair of firsts in 2027, and they are the best 2 picks from the following group of teams: Cleveland, Minnesota, Utah, and the Los Angeles Lakers. And then also the last pick in that deal is a 2031 Phoenix Suns first-round pick. So who knows what the Suns are going to look like at that point in time. That one's a little bit tough to read. The 2027 picks, not super valuable. I mean, Cleveland, Minnesota, and the Lakers all have really bright futures, so I can't foresee any one of those 3 picks being particularly valuable. The only way that this really blows up in the Jazz's face is if they are truly awful again next year and that 2027 first-round pick ends up being a high lottery pick. So that's just kind of worth considering. So now that we got all the assets out of the way, my first reaction is like, wow, I guess the Jazz want to be good now. I mean, this is a stark contrast to the series of moves that we've seen from Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz over the past few years, and it feels like they finally have a core that they're confident in now that they have Keontae George, who's taken a massive leap this season, Ace Bailey, they obviously selected high in the draft, Lauri Markkanen, now Jaren Jackson Jr., and Walker Kessler. That's kind of what I project to be the starting lineup next season. Obviously, Walker Kessler's out for the year, and that's part of the reason they've been so pitiful this year. And it's just a really funky ad to bring in Jaren Jackson Jr. I mean, that's a pretty huge lineup with Markkanen, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Kessler holding down the front court. We've seen Jaren Jackson in Memphis play best alongside another traditional center, rim protector, rebounder. So I think Walker Kessler is going to be very much a part of the Jazz's future. And so I think it's pretty fascinating that they felt like that was a core worth seeing out. Not to say that they have to just like sell off all their assets anytime that they get a semi-decent player if you are a rebuilding team, but I still don't think they're going to be a threat to make any real noise in the Western Conference next year or even within the next couple years unless they absolutely crush another draft pick or find a way to bring another star into their building. They have a lot of young talent. They don't really have that guy to put on the posters. Maybe it's Lauri Markkanen. Maybe it's Keontae George. Maybe it's Jaren Jackson Jr. now. I don't know. But it is nice for Jaren Jackson to get that change of scenery. I think part of the reason that the price, and really the entire reason that the price was so low on Jaren Jackson Jr. is they got him at a discount. He's on a massive contract. He does make $50 million a year for the next 4 seasons, starting next year. So this is a long-term commitment in Jaren Jackson Jr., who he's a great defensive player. He's a pretty funky offensive game to him. He is a pretty decent outside shooter. The problem is that he's not a great rebounder. And again, you do need to have him next to a traditional center to get the best basketball out of Jaren Jackson Jr. So fun player, but he is flawed. I think it's fascinating that the Jazz are actually trying to build a competitive roster as of right now, and I am fascinated to see what that lineup looks like next season. So for Memphis, I think it's like an okay haul. I'd say it's probably like a C+ haul for Jaren Jackson Jr. I mean, at least you get the 3 first-round picks. It is more than what the Mavericks got for Luka Doncic. Hate to bring that up so soon, but that is technically true. I mean, obviously, they didn't get an Anthony Davis in return, but at least they got 3 first-round picks. I wish they would have gotten one young player in return that I was a little bit more excited about. Like, could you have gotten an Isaiah Collier, who's been a nice little backup point guard for Utah now? Bryce Sensabaugh has low-key been lighting it up for the Jazz off the bench. I think just getting a stone-cold bucket in the building in Memphis could be kind of fun. I would have liked to see him in the deal, but maybe they were a little bit higher on like Walter Clayton or Taylor Hendricks than I am, but not a whole lot that I have to say about the young players that Memphis was able to get in return here, but maybe they can prove me wrong. Now, Memphis has made their money drafting in recent years, so the fact that they, again, get 3 first-round picks, get 3 more swings at the plate, and I think they're just hitting the reset button. I said a couple podcasts ago that that's what they should do. I think because they actually did this deal, it makes it much more likely that Ja Morant is going to get traded as well. I think they want to just kind of rebuild, tear it down to the studs, and build back from the ground up. So maybe Ja is a part of that future, maybe not. On the other side of the coin, Lauri Markkanen, I think it's much less likely that he is traded by the Utah Jazz now that it seems like they are trying to be competitive in the near future. So let's talk about the deal that my team, the Boston Celtics, were able to pull off earlier today. They sent Anthony Simons to the Chicago Bulls in exchange for Nikola Vucevic, and it is worth noting that both teams swapped second-round picks as well. I looked over at both picks. It does look like the Bulls got the slightly more valuable second-round pick, so little win there for the Bulls fans, I guess. It is worth noting that both players are on expiring contracts and that this move does put the Celtics below the first apron, but Bobby Marks was all over this. He actually tweeted out a graphic that said the Celtics combined salary/tax bill as of June 15th was $540 million for this season. And now, as of today on February 3rd, that same tax bill went from $540 million in June to $211 million today. So ownership must be thrilled with the fact that we're somehow the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. And on top of that, we just saved a bunch of money. And to give Brad Stevens a lot of credit, it's really cool that we were able to turn Jrue Holiday, who I love. I mean, he's still a talented player when he plays, but he's had some health issues this year. He's on a really big contract that we gave him that I defended at the time because I was just so high on Jrue Holiday. What he brought to that championship Celtics team, I was willing to look past that extension. And then here we are. That extension for Jrue Holiday looks awful, and we were able to turn his contract where he's getting paid out for the next 3-4 years into Anthony Simons, who was really productive for us in the early season, and now into Nikola Vucevic, who I think can fill that need in the front court that we've been missing all year long. So I am sad to see Simons go. My initial reaction was that I was less excited than what I should be because of how much I liked Anthony Simons, because of how much of a luxury it was to have that guy come off the bench and immediately swing games with his scoring, with his outside shooting. Even his defense, he was a little bit more bought in than what I expected when we initially traded for him. So I was definitely sad to see Simons go, but the more I was looking at our front court rotation, I mean, obviously I love Keita. I love what I've seen from Garza in recent stretches. The small sample size of Amari Williams has been encouraging. But how many of those guys do you really trust when we get into the playoffs? Not that Vuce has played in that many playoff games, but he's a veteran. He's older. He's been in a lot of different games. At least we can trust his offense and his shooting a little bit more than maybe our guys. And we just needed to bring another body into the front court. And the reality was we could maybe package together a couple smaller salaries and bring in a backup big man and somebody else in return. But whoever we got in that type of move was not going to be any more proven than the guys we already had in Queta and Garza. So at that point, the front office was like, hey, if we make a move for a front court player, it probably still has to be Anthony Simons, despite how well he's played this season. So even though I didn't love it at first, I've already talked myself into it a little bit. I mean, Vucevic gives us great rebounding, outside shooting. He's a great passer. He's a great finisher. The problem is that he's just an absolute turnstile on defense. I think Vucevic is going to be the starting center for this team come playoff time. And then if there are matchups where he's getting totally exposed, totally blown up, expect to see a lot more Queta in that game. I do think if and when Jason Tatum returns, we're going to be asking a bit more of him on the defensive end of the court than what I'd like to make up for the shortcomings of having Vucevic in the game. But look, as awful as Vucevic has been defensively at earlier spots in his career, at least there's better infrastructure around him in Boston than any of his previous stops. Obviously, this is already the best team that he's ever been a part of, so maybe he buys in a little bit more. Maybe we're able to scheme around that a little bit, utilize that rebounding and what he gives you on the offensive end to make him a plus player, all things told. So on the flip side of the coin, I do want to just talk about it from the Bulls' perspective. I mean, I like this deal in a vacuum. I cannot speak to the plan of the Chicago Bulls. I'm not sure anybody can after they traded for Jaden Ivey and Mike Conley earlier today. They obviously also traded for Anthony Simons as well. I should mention, I'll talk about that Ivey deal on my next podcast. It just wasn't that relevant to me today, and I'm just trying to get back to watching my Celtics literally right now. But yes, the Bulls traded for Jaden Ivey, Mike Conley, and Anthony Simons today, while they still have Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu, who's been balling out for the Bulls lately, Kobe White, and Trey Jones all on the team. So that's, 7 guards in total that are all like maybe 7 of their 9 best players, best assets, maybe besides Conley. So that's just really fascinating. I don't know what the plan is for the Chicago Bulls, but if you are the Bulls and you are going nowhere fast, I do think Anthony Simons in a vacuum is a better asset than Vucevic. I mean, Vucevic is 35, Simons is 26. Assuming that they're able to actually re-sign Simons at a decent number, he's going to be a much more valuable asset than Nikola Vucevic. I think Simons was awesome on the Celtics. I think the scoring, the shot creation, I've talked about it all season long. I'm so impressed. I think he could even be like a second option offensively on a really good team. I think the guy is that talented. So again, I can't defend the Bulls' previous moves of like what they gave up to get Vucevic in the first place and not trading Vucevic to a big needy team in previous deadlines. I think that's pretty pathetic. But if we're just looking at this deal in the vacuum and the fact that Nikola Vucevic was sitting here as an expiring contract, I don't hate the return that the Bulls got for him in this deal. So I'm excited to see Vucevic in Boston. I'm sad to see Simons go. Vucevic, again, is on an expiring contract, so he might only have 3-4 months here as a Boston Celtic, so let's hope that he makes the most of it. And finally, the last deal that I want to talk about just took place within the past 40 minutes, and this one was so confusing to me. I mean, I know that we had the warning signs last night of Shams saying that, hey, the Cavs were interested in James Harden, Darius Garland might be on the move. I still didn't really believe it. I didn't understand it, but here we are. We have the deal. Darius Garland and a second-round pick going to the Clippers and James Harden going to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So what the hell, man? This is really surprising. I think my biggest takeaway is that things in Cleveland were even more dire than what we realized on the outside. I mean, people had high expectations for that team. I, like many others, picked Cleveland to come out of the East, and I hadn't even written them off for this year, despite the fact that they had an awful start. They were around 500 for a while. It felt like they might have turned a corner as of late, but here we are. They felt like they needed to go out and trade Darius Garland for a guy that's much older than James Harden because they felt like James Harden gave them the best opportunity to win now. So it's funny that Cleveland's operating like they have a way shorter window. Maybe they have some inside information about how likely Mitchell is to stay after his contract is up after next year. I think he has a player option after that he's probably going to opt out of. So needless to say, Cleveland is operating like this is their opportunity to win the whole thing or certainly come out of the East. And they felt like James Harden was the best opportunity to improve their roster. So that's really fascinating to me. I mean, maybe they're just really low on Garland. They know more about Garland and his injuries. It is worth noting that he's not healthy right now. He's been banged up most of the season, and even when he plays, it hasn't been the same Darius Garland that we've seen in previous years. I mean, he's only 26 years old, so he can easily get healthy and look awesome even down the stretch later in this season. But I do feel like I'm kind of trusting Cleveland's front office because they have been a well-run team that maybe they know a little bit more about Garland than what we do as a general public. And regardless of what you think of Darius Garland, like his future, what he's going to end up being down the road, it's pretty clear that James Harden is a better and healthier player than Darius Garland right now. So I do think that the ceiling of this Cavs team is actually higher with James Harden. I also think the floor of how this could all shake out is a lot lower as well. Because if you're taking on an older, less valuable asset in order to move on from a guy that was part of your young core, that's just not the type of behavior that you expect from a team that won 60 plus games last year. So that's kind of where I'm at on it. I am really fascinated to see the fit with Donovan Mitchell and James Harden and Evan Mobley, what that trio kind of looks like all together. I think the front office has to be thinking that Harden's going to be able to unlock a little bit more from Evan Mobley offensively and set up Donovan Mitchell a little bit more as well. Obviously, you have the same defensive concerns. Garland was a lot smaller player. James Harden has just been largely disinterested in defense, so you're still going to have some issues on that end of the court regardless if you're Cleveland. But that's the decision that they decided to make. So let's look at this from the Clippers' point of view. I do think it makes sense that the Clippers would want to get a guy that is a little bit younger, that they finally have somewhat of a young asset that they can kind of build around, that's not a Kawhi Leonard or a Zubac, who are both past 30 at this point in time. I mean, they have a few guys like Jordan Miller, who I've really liked this year, and Kobe Sanders, but nobody that you'd really bank your future on. And now you at least have the upside of Darius Garland. If he looks like how he looked early in his career, could easily turn this around, could even turn this around this season and be the better player down the stretch. So I don't want to rule that outcome for the Clippers. I do think it is worth noting that the Clippers have been notoriously all in like the past 3 years. So it is surprising in some aspects that they felt comfortable moving off of James Harden with how productive he's been. I mean, he's like 25-10 this year, having one of the better seasons of his recent career. So it's just a fascinating deal through and through. It's very rare you see basically a one-for-one swap of guys that play the same position, albeit there's a 10-year age gap here. But the best part is that we're going to find out, and we're going to find out quickly, especially in the case of the Cleveland Cavaliers. If he's not immediately gelling with Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley, not only does that mean that the Cavs are probably submarines for this season, it probably also means that their window that we thought with this current group of Cleveland Cavaliers is a lot shorter than what we initially imagined. So excited to see how this plays out. It's a really special trade. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little addition to the podcast, and please keep listening to all the great content that I recorded for you guys yesterday. So let's dive into the biggest headline of the week, which again was a Giannis update from Shams Charania. Let me read you the tweet because I think the wording here is very important, and this is what came out early on Saturday morning. It said, two-time MVP Giannis is ready for a new home at the February 5th NBA trade deadline or in the offseason as several rival teams make aggressive offers to the Milwaukee Bucks for him, and the franchise is starting to listen, league sources tell ESPN. So my initial reaction was just laughing at how funny the wording is. Giannis is ready for a new home. That was like the main takeaway there. It is very funny that Giannis, he's trying to stay loyal to Milwaukee. He's never going to come out and actually say that he wants to be traded. But this is as close as we're going to get. I mean, all signs are pointing to Giannis's camp kind of turning up the heat on Milwaukee's front office to be like, dude, get me out of here. I don't want to be here. This team stinks. And I can't really blame him for wanting out. I just wish he would kind of have the balls to be nasty about it so he'd actually get what he wants here. It's like he's trying to save face, which it's the same thing that he's been doing over the past couple seasons now where it seemed like the writing was on the wall. And it feels like we've reached a breaking point. Now, I don't think we're going to get any more updates or any more news from Giannis's camp unless he doesn't get dealt at the deadline, and then it gets even messier later in the season, which we can talk about that scenario here in a minute. But honestly, I'm just so tired of this story. Like, I waited it out a couple extra days in the hopes that he would just get traded before the weekend. That way I wouldn't have to do a podcast where we're still in this gray area here. And I get it to the Bucks fans that are just still adamant. They don't want to trade this guy. He's a once-in-a-generational player. It's so rare, especially in the modern NBA, that you get a guy that's this special, that's going to spend his entire career with one franchise. There's definitely value in that. But the flip side of that coin is that their future is just so bleak. And I do feel like I am in a position to actually speak on this as a Celtics fan who remembers vividly the night that we traded Paul Pierce, who would have been a lifelong Celtic, and then obviously Kevin Garnett, who was beloved. On draft night, we shipped them away to the Brooklyn Nets, and we got a fucking haul. A fucking haul that ended up turning into Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, whatever. And that's a one-of-one situation. That's probably not going to happen even if a team were to fork over $1 million picks for Giannis. I understand. how ridiculous that was. And trades like that just like don't even get made like that anymore for guys that were that old. The number of picks, the lack of protections on those picks from the Nets, like Billy King just gave the Celtics an absolute blessing. But I do want to throw out that stuff like that outcome is still possible when we're talking about getting 4 or 5 first-round picks for a guy in Giannis, or 4 picks plus a bunch of young players. Like, you can get your way out of this hole. Like, the only way you're digging out of the hole that you're in right now is to trade this guy. So it needs to happen. I truly think that the Bucks are the worst team in the NBA without Giannis, and maybe that's recency bias because they played my Celtics yesterday and it was just such a dud of a game. I mean, the Celtics didn't even play that well and they absolutely smoked them. I just think the 2 through 12 on that roster like might truly be worse than teams like Washington and Utah and Brooklyn. I mean, it's that bad for Milwaukee. They just have nothing going on. And the complicated thing is that Giannis's value has taken a hit. It is important to remember that he's out with another calf strain, which we don't really have an official diagnosis on that. We have Giannis self-diagnosing himself that he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, which is an identical timetable to what we saw earlier in the season when he had a previous calf strain. And then we even had Doc Rivers coming on ESPN yesterday, right before the Celtics game, to basically talk about how he thought Giannis was going to be back at some point. And basically, he was just reciting a bunch of nonsense to bump up Giannis's trade value before the deadline. So Milwaukee can go right ahead and wait until the offseason if they really want, if they think they're going to get better offers, if there's nobody that's really willing to pony up right now. Teams obviously have a lot more flexibility in the offseason where they can prepare, they can move assets around, whereas in the deadline, you really have to uproot your entire team and all of your draft assets if you want to go out and get a guy like Giannis, who, again, might not even be healthy the rest of this year. My gut would say that he comes back and plays, but there is a real injury concern with Giannis that didn't exist in previous seasons, especially because this is like the first regular season that he's been banged up for a while. But before that, he's had those unfortunate timed injuries in the playoffs. So there is a real track record here. But I would say the worst scenario, if they don't decide to trade him at the deadline, is like, if you're in Milwaukee's situation, they don't technically have control of their pick this year. They have the least favorable between their pick and the New Orleans Pelicans. So the Pelicans are pretty awful too. I mean, there's always a chance that the Pelicans turn around, start being a little bit more competitive, but it's still in the Bucks' best interest to be bad because there's like a 50-50 shot that they end up getting their own pick if New Orleans is somehow worse than what the Bucks have been. So if I'm the Bucks and I'm not able to trade Giannis within the next couple days here, I am absolutely not bringing that guy back to play after he suffered 2 calf strains in the same season. Now, I think it could get messy at that point because Giannis at the same time is very competitive and he might not want to show that he's like damaged or anything like that, and he's going to want to play it out. And I feel like that could fray the relationship even more than what it already has between the Bucks and Giannis. So I'm just throwing that out there. So they should very much be hitting all the phones up right now, making sure they're fielding every team's best offer. So at this point, I want to go through and analyze the teams that have the most that they could possibly give up for Giannis. I think this is a clear top tier with the Oklahoma City Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs. The commonality there is, despite the fact that they can give up the most, they have young players, they have draft picks, they have an absolute haul that they can throw at Giannis. I don't really see that happening. I think the Spurs should at least consider it, see what that price is. I mean, it's really hard to imagine a deal gets done without Harper or Castle in the deal, and San Antonio probably says no. I think they would have to consider it, but I understand if they'd want to hold off, especially given the recent injury concerns with Giannis that we just talked about. I think the next tier of a team that we know is going to make a swing, but probably doesn't have the assets, is Golden State. If they really wanted to go all in and just leverage their entire future, I do think that they could put together a compelling offer. They probably don't have the players, right? It's probably Kuminga, maybe Jimmy Butler's contract, something along those lines there. But then they do have control of their picks down the road. And once you start getting to like the 2029, 2030, 2031 range, that's where you're kind of looking at post-Steph, probably post-Giannis being as dominant as what he is. Those Golden State picks are going to end up being really valuable, even if they're able to pull off this trade. So I do think that's possible, but that would be completely contradictory to everything that Golden State has done over the past couple seasons. Now, it has gotten a lot darker in Golden State now that Jimmy Butler's out for the year, so maybe they'll do it. They're a team to monitor. I would say the sleeper teams that have a real shot at this, just because Giannis will probably want to sign an extension once he's traded, is Minnesota and Houston. I'm not entirely sure how the money would work there. Houston actually has a lot more assets than Minnesota where they can throw future draft capital in there, but I'm not sure if the finances would work out because Kevin Durant doesn't really do anything for Milwaukee at this stage, and it'd be interesting to see if they could make the money work without including Kevin Durant in that deal, but I just wanted to monitor those teams right there. And then the last tier, I would say, are the most likely candidates, maybe the most desirable candidates from Milwaukee's perspective, are Atlanta and Portland. Atlanta has a ton of picks, including the most favorable between the Milwaukee or New Orleans pick right there that we talked about earlier. Atlanta has control of that from the deal that they did on draft night. That on its own might be like the golden ship in a Giannis deal. They'd have to put in some salaries to make the money work, but they might not have to put in any more picks when we're talking about potentially the number one overall pick in the draft. That's something to consider. Portland has swap rights for Milwaukee in a couple years, and they have a few young assets that they can throw back in return. I think the thing that would sandbag those deals is that, look, behind the scenes, Giannis definitely has the ability to influence this deal more than people realize. He can easily step in and be like, hey, Portland, hey, Atlanta, maybe even a team like Miami, let's say. They could go out and be interested in acquiring Giannis, but if Giannis says, hey, I'm not going to sign there, don't even bother, then those teams are not going to make an offer. So I do think Giannis obviously has some say in this. I think that the more competitive teams are still going to be more desirable because Giannis will definitely want to sign there long term. Does he want to sign with like a Golden State? What do you want to sign in like an Atlanta or a Portland? I don't know. But those are kind of all the teams in the mix. I'd say, again, just to quickly rehash, OKC and San Antonio, probably not going to happen, but they could make the best offer. I'd say Atlanta and Portland are going to make really competitive offers. It's about if Giannis wants to go there. And then Golden State, Minnesota, Houston are probably that next tier of teams where they're definitely going to pick up the phone and at least make a call, but I'm not sure they're going to have the assets to ultimately get that deal done. So I'd say in totality, there's probably a 50-50 shot that Giannis gets dealt at some point this week. And obviously, we're going to report back on the next podcast with the outcome of what that trade looks like if he is dealt. So let's move on and talk about the only really notable deal that we've had so far. And this was technically a 3-team deal between the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Sacramento Kings, and of course the Chicago Bulls. If the Kings are making a deal, the Bulls just have to be in there. So let's talk about what that deal looked like. In this move, the Cavs received Keon Ellis, Dennis Schroeder, and then Emmanuel Miller. The Kings received DeAndre Hunter in this deal, and then finally Chicago's haul from this for taking on Dario Saric's contract is 2 second-round picks, which I believe were dealt from Sacramento. So my analysis of this deal really isn't any different than all the other analysis that I've heard on other NBA podcasts, is that I do like it for Cleveland. Not only are they turning one tangible asset into 2 with Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder, but this also gives them a lot more flexibility. This basically saves them $44 million in luxury tax savings, and it does kind of set them up to be a little bit more flexible with the next move here if they were to make another move before the deadline. And it is kind of complicated, right? I was very high on the move for Cleveland to acquire DeAndre Hunter from Atlanta at last year's trade deadline. So if you're wondering what changed, I mean, the Cavs have been really disappointing this season. It's really night and day compared to where they were at last year. DeAndre Hunter, his three-point shooting has completely fallen off a cliff. He's shooting 31% from 3 this year. They've kind of oscillated him between the starting lineup, then they tried to move him to come off the bench to try to give him a little bit more share of voice in the offense when he is playing, and that really hasn't helped improve his percentages all that much. And on the inverse, you're getting back 2 assets. The first guy in Keon Ellis. This one's kind of fascinating because the nerds have loved this guy forever. He's a great perimeter defender, plays with a ton of effort, also shoots the 3 ball at a really high clip. Admittedly, his 3-point shooting has fallen off a little bit this year, but he's still a plus 3-point shooter, and it gives Cleveland a lot of insurance for Garland. Maybe they're worried about him having like his 3rd injury of the year. Even when he's played, he's been, unfortunately, a lot less productive than what we've seen in previous years. So I do like that move for the Cavs to actually go out there, get that flexibility, and move on from a guy in DeAndre Hunter who regressed a bit this season. So I do think there is a bit of a logjam at the guard position now for the Cavs, right? You still have Garland, you still have Mitchell, you have Lonzo Ball there, who frankly has kind of fallen out of the rotation. Craig Porter Jr. is a guy that's been able to give them good minutes at times. Sam Merrill is obviously a plus 3-point shooter. So they still have a lot of guys to sort out, but I will admit that the emergence of Jalen Tyson, how great he's been in his 2nd season, definitely made DeAndre Hunter a lot more expendable. They should be getting Max Strus back here at some point in the near future. So Cleveland's going to have a lot to sort out in their rotation, but ultimately it gives them more options. And for the savings alone, I think it makes a lot of sense for them. Now, the Kings, I'm not going to totally kill them, right? Because I don't think in a vacuum this deal is that bad. It's just like the totality of what they did this past offseason. And this deal is also like trying to make up for that. I mean, they basically had to just pay a couple second-round picks just to get off of Dario Saric, who they traded for. In return, they gave away Jonas Valanciunas, a very productive player for the Nuggets. They get a guy in Saric that hasn't been productive in years. And so that's just like the effect of this deal. Any draft capital that they might have been able to recoup in this deal, they immediately had to send out to Chicago to get rid of Dario Saric. So that was really dumb. It also just seems like I don't really know what DeAndre Hunter does for them. I guess theoretically it gives them some size. I mean, they have like a ton of smaller players in the rotation. Nobody that really wants to play any sort of defense. I know DeAndre Hunter's kind of a better theoretical defender than he is in real life. So maybe he brings some sort of defensive identity, and when the team is right and Keegan Murray's back in the lineup, you have Murray, you have Hunter, you have Sabonis, and that's your front court. And then, LaVine and DeRozan, you can afford to hide them a little bit more, I guess. But ultimately, they're a team that needs to be looking at acquiring younger assets, getting back draft capital, and they accomplish none of the above. And so that's kind of the deal in a nutshell. I don't think it's worth diving into that anymore, besides the fact that it is hilarious that any time the Kings make a deal, it seems like the Bulls have to be involved in some way, shape, or form. They should probably get banned from being able to trade with one another there. But it is a nice little pickup for the Bulls in this to get a couple second-round picks just to add some salary. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I don't want to totally again, bash on the Kings here, because I think there's a world where DeAndre Hunter, at least on paper right now, he is the best player in the deal. He could break out of his slump a little bit in Sacramento, look really good, recoup some of his value there. And Keon Ellis, look, I like him when I see him play. Every smart basketball person I know seems to like him as well. So at some point, it just seems like Sacramento sold really low on an asset that might have been a bright spot for their team. But until we see it actually play out and we see Keon Ellis play meaningful basketball, I'll reserve judgment until that point. And before we move on, one more deal to talk about real quick between the Atlanta Hawks and the Portland Trailblazers. In this deal, the Portland Trailblazers received Vit Krejci, and the Hawks received Duop Reath and 2 second-round picks. So, unfortunately, Duop Reath is out for the season. He was kind of a fun little story there in Portland. So, my guess is that Atlanta ultimately waives him if he has not been waived already. So, basically, the Hawks are just selling Vit Krejci for 2 second-round picks, gets him a little bit more flexibility, again, heading into the deadline here. So, I do like the move for Portland. I think them getting another outside shooter who is on a really cheap contract for, I believe, the next 3 years. I think the third year is a team option that they're obviously going to pick up for $3 million if Vit continues to play as well as what he has. He's like a plus 3-point shooter, so you really can't go wrong there. I do understand why the Hawks were willing to give him away in the same breath, just because they already had Luke Kennard. They acquired Corey Kispert in that Trae Young deal. So Reese Shea, I mean, obviously handles a lot of those same spot-up roles as well when he's playing. So the Hawks just have a lot of guys to fill those spots. So my guess is Atlanta is doing this to try to set up some other move later in the week. But I do overall like it a little bit more for Portland just because they were able to buy a productive player that fills a role on a really cheap contract. So before we get into my reaction to the all-star rosters being announced, I just wanted to talk about a few different matchups and one team that's been red hot as of late. But we're going to start off with the return of Sunday Night Basketball on NBC and the couple game slate that we had there. That was really fun. Obviously, no football going on. We just have the Pro Bowl this week. Obviously, I'm gearing up for the Super Bowl with my Pats in the mix there, but there was an open spot in prime time. I mean, I guess it was going up against the Grammys, so it wasn't that open, but it was pretty cool to see NBC really try to make a real production out of the primetime slate on that particular night. It's definitely going to be wide open after the Super Bowl, right? Like every Sunday night between now and the end of the NBA season for me, I'm going to be locked in. It'd be really cool if we can continue to get marquee matchups games. If you guys didn't watch, you don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, it is really no different than NBC's coverage of the NBA all year long. They just try to drum it up a little bit more. They had an extended pregame. All of their talent was under one roof for the studio shows and everything like that. And I thought, ultimately, it went pretty well. My only picking nits with the production itself is that, and this really isn't a production thing, it's more of a scheduling issue. I wish the games that we had, Lakers versus Knicks and Thunder versus Nuggets, I wish that they were island games. I wish they were the only games going on. It was a really big slate on Sunday, and there were a bunch of other teams playing. All the other matchups ended up sucking, so anybody in their right mind was probably watching NBC if they were trying to watch some basketball. But Worldwide Wob called it out on Twitter. He's obviously the best in the business for a reason, and he was like, look, this needs to be an island game. It needs to feel like a special shared experience for everybody that wants to watch basketball is going to be watching the same game. So maybe that's something that the NBA and NBC looks into doing a little bit more as the season goes on. Not going to spend a lot of time on the Knicks-Lakers game. I mean, that ended up being a pretty comfortable win for the Knicks. It was a really fun matchup because I think the Knicks have been struggling a little bit lately. And the Lakers, I mean, they're both extremely talented teams, but they're clearly very flawed as well. And it was ultimately the Lakers' lack of defense And the Knicks defense actually stepping up in a pretty big way that ended up swinging the matchup late in that game. But I really wanted to focus on the Nuggets versus Thunder game because I thought that was a really fun matchup. Obviously, the first time that these teams have played since going 7 games in the Western Conference Finals last year. Both teams were down a lot of key players as well. Both teams were down exactly 3 key players, in my opinion. The Thunder missing J-Dub, Caruso, and AJ Mitchell. The Nuggets missing Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, and Cam Johnson. So frankly, I was feeling really confident about Denver as my finals pick heading into this. I just felt like with the emergence of Peyton Watson as a scorer, as an offensive playmaker, I mean, he was already like a one-of-one athlete, and his offensive leap this year has been really what's powered the Nuggets in the absence of Nikola Jokic. You also have Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Jonas Valanciunas giving a huge boost to the Nuggets bench, which frankly, just last year, it felt like they were one guy away from maybe beating the Thunder, and then they're able to turn Westbrook into 3 really productive players this offseason. I loved that move at the time. And, you know, those guys have been fantastic for the Nuggets all year long. It's also the best year of Jamal Murray's career. And of course, we had the return of Jokic. It was really cool that he came back really without any lead up after a month off of basketball. He jumped right into it and had a really impressive performance like 2 nights before against the Clippers, in which they were able to win, and immediately was put to the test again by playing the Thunder. So, you know, obviously I'm a pro Jokic guy. I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anybody listening to this, but I will say it was pretty cool the way he returned. He could have easily waited a little bit longer. Some guys aren't wired like that to immediately step in and play against 2 different teams that you went 7 games against in the playoffs last year. 2 teams playing extremely well in the Clippers and the Thunder. So I'm glad Jokic was able to return for those matchups. But getting into the game itself, that's where my confidence in Denver started to wane a little bit here because it was an awesome OKC win on the road in Denver. Shea was unbelievable in this one, easily the best player on the floor, 34 points, 13 assists, in complete control, arguably one of the best passing games of his career. Now, it was buoyed a little bit by abnormally hot OKC shooting, which some people might argue they were due for a really good shooting game. A lot of their struggles lately have come from the fact that they haven't been able to hit outside jumpers. And then you get a guy in Cason Wallace just go off for 27 points, 7 of 11 shooting from 3. Like, that's not going to happen all that often. But Denver actually shot better from 3, at least percentage-wise in that game. OKC took way more threes than normal, but I think they shot like 39% on the game. Denver was up at 45%, so you really can't blame that for what swung the matchup in OKC's favor. It was really their incredible defense on both Jokic and Murray in this one. Both of those guys really struggled in the matchup. So I felt like OKC actually needed this game a lot more than what people realized, just because it felt like they were getting a lot of negative attention. I think they were like 14-9 in their previous stretch of games, which is about as bad of a stretch as we've seen from the Thunder in like the past couple seasons here. I know health has a lot to do with that as well, but I felt like they just needed that to set the tone. Shea needed a big game to really reassure himself as like the top candidate for the MVP award right now. But ultimately, my biggest takeaway is that I'm just so confident that those 2 teams are going to meet some way, somehow, in the Western Conference Finals. I mean, unless the playoff bracket shakes out where somehow Denver drops down to like a 4 seed or something like that, that's really the only way that I don't see these 2 teams coming out of the West. I mean, San Antonio's had an awesome year. I don't think they're going to be able to compete with either of those 2 teams right now. I think Houston, especially with the loss of Steven Adams, pending something insane at the deadline, I think there's clearly a top class in the Western Conference. And as much as I still like Denver, I mean, they are still my pick. They were my pick before the season. I felt really good about them before the game. But ultimately, I am getting pretty worried about Denver's health stretch right now. I mean, Aaron Gordon continues to re-injure his hamstring, and I just feel like they need a stretch in March, in April, toward the end of the regular season with all their guys playing if they actually want to gel and have a rhythm and have a real shot to beat the Thunder in the playoffs. If they're not able to get that stretch of good health, like, part of the reason everybody likes Denver right now is because you look at how good they're playing and they're like, oh, they don't have this guy and they don't have this guy. And theoretically, when they're all back and playing at the same time, but you know, it does feel like with how their luck has been and with how tricky hamstring injuries are, especially for Aaron Gordon, with how important he is, it just feels like their health luck might not actually turn around. Whereas the Thunder, I feel a little bit better about them. They've been really cautious with their guys. Like, I think even Caruso and AJ Mitchell, I don't think they really have serious injuries. They should be back pretty soon. And Jalen Williams, you know, he's been proven to move in and out of the lineup, and that doesn't even affect how good the Thunder are most of the time anyway. So feel really good about OKC after that win, but Denver is still going to be my pick. So moving on to another team and another matchup specifically that I wanted to call out, we got to talk about the Charlotte Hornets here. They've won 7 games in a row. And let me just list off the teams that they've beaten in that stretch. It was Orlando, Washington, Philly, Memphis, Dallas, San Antonio, and New Orleans, which was earlier today. Dallas, that game in particular was awesome. Potentially the game of the year. It was in Dallas. In the matchup, Cooper Flagg finished with 49 points and Con Knuppel had 34. Just really exciting game. Came down to the wire. I can't believe how good Cooper Flagg is. This really wasn't supposed to be a Cooper Flagg segment, but goddamn, he really doesn't even have the jumper firing yet. And anytime he gets in transition, anytime he even has like a one-on-one matchup, like he's beating his guy off the dribble at the size, the body control, the touch he has from like 6 feet, those little push shots, those little floaters, is just so beyond his years. I mean, he's going to be unbelievable. And Con Knuppel's right there as well. We'll talk more about him in a second. But for anybody that hasn't watched the Hornets lately, I implore you guys to watch them. I mean, they've been a league pass darling for years, right? Even well before this season. Just the strength of LaMelo Ball when he plays and Eric Collins, the best announcer in the business. Off those two guys alone, the Hornets were an awesome league pass team. But now their starting 5 is one of the most efficient lineups in basketball. Just to read you guys that lineup, it's obviously LaMelo, Con Knuppel, Brandon Miller, Bridges, and they've recently moved to Moussa Diabate in the starting lineup, who's an incredible energy big. And it really feels like they found something here. I mean, the ages of those guys are 24, 20, 23, 27, and 24 respectively. So I guess Bridges is the old man of that group at 27 years old. And even though they're really good right now, I feel like it's just like the trajectory of this team and where it's headed is suddenly really special. And it's been a long time for Hornets fans, so I wanted to show them a little bit of love on this segment. It wasn't exactly a murderer's row of matchups of those 7 teams that they beat, but still, you know, beating teams like Orlando, Philly, San Antonio especially are really great for a young team with not a ton of expectations heading into the season. So do I think Charlotte is suddenly like a favorite coming out of the East? Absolutely not. I still like at least 5, maybe even 6 teams more than Charlotte. But I do think what they can do on offense with LaMelo Ball, with those shooters around him, like they're a threat to put up 130 points on any defense in the NBA. So they might be a tough out, and I do think it would be a huge for their development if they could sneak into the play-in playoff picture. They're still technically at the 11 seed in the East, so they have a little bit of work to do if they want to secure a play-in game or especially a home play-in game where they could feasibly make it out and match up with like a New York or a Detroit or even a Boston in the first round. I think that would be huge for their development. So I just want to give the Hornets a little bit of love. I do think they have a super bright future. I'm not really taking them serious this year just because the lack of veterans on their team. I mean, with all due respect to my guy Grant Williams, I don't see a lot of guys that have been in wars on that team. If the big 3 in Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, and Con Knuppel continue to develop, like everybody's been on Con all year long and for great reason, but the leap that Brandon Miller has shown in this recent stretch of basketball, literally looking like a baby Paul George out there, is really exciting stuff. So, and the last thing I'll say on Charlotte is there was a really funny soundbite that came out. It was probably only like a month, maybe 6 weeks ago at this point in time. And it was some reporter asking Con a question, what it meant to play against Klay Thompson in a game. And it was something like, oh, because you're inevitably going to be compared to this man throughout the rest of your career. And it sounded a little ridiculous coming from the reporter, and credit to Con Knuppel, who's apparently just a great on all media formats. If you guys haven't heard him, immediately called him out. He's like, well, I wouldn't say that. Or he's like, I wouldn't go that far, or something like that. Like kind of told the reporter to calm down with the Klay Thompson comparisons. But even though we're only, 50-something games into his rookie year, I am officially allowing the Klay Thompson comparisons with Con Knuppel because he is just such an unbelievable shooter. It doesn't matter if it's catch and shoot, one dribble up fake, off the bounce. He is an elite shooter like I have never seen from a rookie ever before. And it's going to show. I mean, he's probably going to shatter every rookie record for three-point shooting, and just having a guy like that, in addition to all the little intangible stuff that he does for his team, and having a guy like that in your building that's doing all that little stuff at 20 years old is probably a huge reason why the Hornets have been great. And also shout out former Celtic Charles Lee as their head coach. He's done a masterful job with that team. Let's move on and talk about the all-star rosters that were announced yesterday. And so obviously we knew the starting lineup at the time I recorded my last podcast, so I give you my reserve picks. So I'm sure you guys, if you listen to my last episode, have some idea of where we're headed right now. But let's start off just by reading the rosters in each conference. Let's start off in the East. We knew the starters were Giannis, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, Cade Cunningham, and Maxey. But yesterday we found out the reserves are Scotty Barnes, Jalen Duren, Jalen Johnson, Donovan Mitchell, Norm Powell, Pascal Siakam, and Karl Anthony Towns. So we'll start in the East here. I mean, frankly, I felt like the last couple spots in the East were a complete crapshoot, so I don't really have a huge problem with where we ended up. I definitely feel a lot stronger about the West that we're going to get to here in a second. The two differences that I would have had on my ballot compared to the actual roster that was selected was Norm Powell and Pascal Siakam. Those last two guys in, I would have probably swapped them out with guys like Bam Adebayo and Paolo Banchero. I just feel like the Paulo hate has been a little bit overblown for a guy that's still been really productive on a team that is above average, even though they did not meet their expectations. I'm not going to get too mad at Siakam being in there. I think he's having an awesome season career-wise. All of his averages are right where they've always been, maybe even a little bit higher, despite how awful the team around him has been. So if you want to give the nod to a guy that's proven he's been an all-star, who's having a really productive season, they've just had horrible injury luck. And even on my last podcast, I said that the Pacers lacked a will to win. I don't actually feel that about like the players when they're on the court. I think when they have, most of their guys out there, I think they can beat anybody in the NBA on any given night. I just feel like they've been a little bit creative with resting guys here and there in addition to the really shitty injury luck. Like, it's no secret that, the front office is obviously telling Carlisle to be like, hey, let's be gentle with the minutes on this guy, or let's rest this guy tonight, because they want to cash in on having a high draft pick while their star player's out. So I get all that. I probably wouldn't have had Siakam in there just because of the team performance element, but I'm not going to get too mad about him being on there. My biggest nit with the Eastern Conference is Norm Powell, which does pain me because I've always been a pro Norm Powell guy. I mean, I kind of thought of him as like a fantastic like S-tier bench player, and then he has even improved since then, and he's been like a clear starter, a clear offensive hub. He's just such a bucket. I do feel like the playmaking can leave some to be desired. Same thing on the defensive end of the court. And frankly, I don't think he's the best player on the Miami Heat. I mean, if you wanted to have a Heat player in there and you're really just looking at like the first 2 months of the season, I could see how you would arrive at Norm Powell. I just feel like Bam offensively has taken a leap, has just been better on the defensive end of the court. So I could definitely make the argument for Bam. I could definitely make the argument for a guy in Michael Porter Jr. if you're going to go with like, the really efficient scorer shooting type. I know Michael Porter is on a way worse team than Norm Powell, but it's really hard to say that Norm Powell has had a better season than Michael Porter Jr. I mean, he's had just a couple like 40 balls, even in like the last week since recording this podcast. So I feel like he could be snubbed. I feel like Paulo could be snubbed. So I just felt like we got a little bit cute with Norm Powell there, to be totally honest with you. I'm happy for the guy, first-time All-Star. He's been a fantastic player over the years, so I'm definitely happy for him. I just feel like we probably should have just used our brains a little bit and thought about who truly is the best player on the Miami Heat before making that roster selection. But let's move on to the Western Conference and go through the starters and reserves there. Again, we knew the starters were Steph, Luka, Shea, Jokic, and Wemby. The reserves that were announced yesterday, we have Denny Advia, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Anthony Edwards, Chet Holmgren, LeBron James, and Jamal Murray. Now, this one is where I feel a little bit stronger about it. I think it is complete and utter horse shit with two of these spots in the West, not just one, but two. Denny Advia getting in over a guy like Şengün, and LeBron James getting in over a guy like Kawhi. And part of the reason I'm making those comps the way I just did, or making those, picking those nits the way I just did, comparing Denny to Şengün and LeBron to Kawhi, is because I completely forgot about this weird new format that they're doing this year. I didn't even mention it on my last podcast, where I guess we need to have 16 USA players and 8 players from the rest of the world. That way they can compete, because I guess there's going to be 2 different USA teams and then 1 world team, and there's going to be this weird bracket. I'm not even going to get into the bullshit of the format. And let me just say, if that ultimately went into the league's decision and the media's decision when building out these rosters, like, oh, like we wanted so-and-so in, but we need to have Denny Advia because we need another foreign player. Like, that's so fucking dumb. It's hard enough as it is to make the All-Star team. Like, if somebody's going to get out on a technicality because of the country that they're from, like, that totally defeats the purpose of this entire exercise. Like, I agree, it's awesome how much all-world talent we have from all these other countries. Like, it's at an all-time high. And by the way, on paper, the team world is going to absolutely roll up and smoke USA. It definitely should. I mean, almost all the best players in the world with Wemby and Jokic and Shea and Luka. I mean, it's going to be out of control how good that world team is. But really stupid if that affected this roster in any way, shape, or form. But back to what I was saying, I just feel like Şengün compared to Denny is a better player on a much better team. Like, since when, especially in the Western Conference, do we have to go out and reward a guy putting up really fancy counting stats on a team that's like 4 games below 500? The Blazers are worse than the Clippers by a couple games now. And the Clippers started awful. The Clippers right now are one of the hottest teams in basketball. Kawhi Leonard is playing the best basketball of his entire career. We know how good Kawhi is on both ends of the court. And meanwhile, we elected this 6'9", foul baiting loser that turns the ball over 4 to 5 times per game, no matter what. I mean, I can't stand watching Denny Avdija. I understand he's really productive. I understand the on-off stuff with him in Portland is really encouraging, where they really seem like they need him on the court, but I'm just not buying it. And especially in the Western Conference, where we've had years where guys like Devin Booker don't make the team. Jamal Murray's never made an all-star team. We're going to reward the guy with like the one outlier season on a team that's 4 games below 500 in the West. Like, I could see some shit like that flying in the East, where like you have a Michael Porter Jr., you have a Pascal Siakam, whatever. But in the West, rewarding a guy in Denny Avdija, that's crazy work, especially with Şengün. There's a real argument to be made. He's the best player on the Rockets. I know the efficiency stuff isn't great. I know he's not the best defender in the world, but there's a reason on this supremely talented Rockets team where they continuously decide to run their offense in late game situations through Şengün. He is one of the best post players in the NBA. He's one of the best passers in the NBA, point blank period. Let alone when you include the position that he plays. He can score at all 3 levels. I love Şengün. So I was pretty hurt by that one. And then, look, the LeBron one, I understand a little bit more. I mean, it's LeBron James. He's an attraction. It's not, the game's not at Crypto, it's at the Intuit Dome, but the game's still in LA, so they probably felt some sort of obligation to have LeBron there, but it's pretty lame. It's pretty lame that we couldn't give it to the other guy that's actually from LA, that's playing for the Clippers, that's having the best season of his career. Like, he deserved that spot over LeBron. So I can't say I'm surprised about the LeBron one. I'm a little bit less mad about that. But if you look at the counting stats, there's no way that LeBron should be considered. And even if you want to give him a pass, because he missed a lot of the time with sciatica and some of the numbers are reduced because he was working his way back up, I still don't think that LeBron's been an all-star player for most of the season. He probably has for the past couple weeks, but Kawhi's just been way better. So that's kind of where I'm at on the all-star game as a whole. I think the format is a complete nightmare. I'm already pretty upset about these rosters, if you couldn't tell, at least on the Western side of things. I'll probably only be mad about it for another day, and then I'll get over it. But I'm really not looking forward to All-Star Weekend because I think this format is so stupid. If you listen to any of my rants about the All-Star games over the years, I think they just need to keep it simple, go back to East-West, crank up the cash money prizes and throw out the rock and let them play. So I'm not optimistic about this at all, but the only thing that's giving me a sliver of hope about this All-Star Weekend this year is that it's actually going to be on NBC. Obviously, TNT was the one that had the rights to All-Star Weekend for the past really my entire life, like 3 decades at least. TNT has been doing the All-Star game. And so, but it's going to be interesting to see how much the production and the network, how much say they have over the game itself and the pace in which it's kept. And so I'm optimistic that if it's produced a little bit better, if it flows a little bit better, there's less dead time in the All-Star game itself, maybe it can be a little bit more entertaining than what we've seen in years past. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. I'll definitely be back within the next week with a reaction to the NBA trade deadline. I think how exciting the deadline is determines when I'll record my next podcast, right? If we get like a crazy